Eberhard Hitler, originally from the eastern part of Pomerania, a territory that is now part of Poland, as a veteran of the Wehrmacht, could not reconcile himself until the end of his days with the fact that his native lands and home were transferred to the Poles after the end of the war. His father was an entrepreneur, but their family lived in such poverty that it is difficult to imagine in our time. However, with Hitler's rise to power, their situation changed dramatically for the better. People had jobs and therefore money, which explains the widespread support for the Führer and the NSDAP. In 1934, the Hitler family moved to Berlin, where Eberhard went to school, which was soon renamed the National Socialist Educational Institution. The students were given uniforms, and changes were made to the curriculum. This educational institution became NAPOLA, Nationalpolitische Erziehungsanstalt, a national political school designed to train leaders and provide the right to enter higher education institutions. Hitler's rise to power was only a catalyst for the patriotic sentiments that had long matured in society and directed them in the direction he wanted. Before his time as head of state, every year in every region of Germany, there was a change of 2 or 3 governments, and daily rallies and demonstrations of various political groups took place. Communists, SA stormtroopers. The people were tired of this political confusion and chaos. With the rise to power of the NSDAP, there was a noticeable economic and political relief. The people united, and people received the order, enthusiasm, and faith in a bright future so valued by the Germans. The most vivid memory of Hitler's youth was the Olympic Games in Berlin, where he had the opportunity to be a volunteer and be in the very center of events. He also remembered the Sappers, who often had to act as ordinary infantrymen. After completing his studies at NAPOLA in 1939, Hitler entered the Waffen-SS Junker School, where he studied for 9 months. He was then assigned to a Sapper unit of the 5th SS Motorized Division Viking. On April 21, 1941, his unit was redeployed to Poland, on the border with the Soviet Union. Until June 21st, the officers did not mention a planned attack on the USSR. There were rumors that Stalin had given permission for German troops to pass through the territory of the USSR to Iran and Palestine in order to strike at the British. There was also a version that they were transferred as a barrier against a possible attack by the USSR, which intelligence had learned about. After the start of the invasion, the Sappers had a lot of work to do. They were engaged in defusing mines, building and repairing bridges that had been partially blown up by the retreating Red Army soldiers. On June 30th, 1941, Hitler was in Lviv and witnessed large-scale pogroms. According to him, the Germans did not interfere, leaving it to the Ukrainians to carry out their reprisals themselves. The Russians were not only retreating, but also launching counterattacks. Near Cherkasy, our regiment was surrounded, but then we were unblocked at that time. The Red Army could not complete such operations. However, it must be admitted that the situation at that moment was critical. Hitler received the Iron Cross Second Class after another counterattack by the Red Army soldiers south of Berdichev. There the Germans had serious problems, and the Sappers had to fight as ordinary infantrymen. In September, they were already in Dnipropetrovsk, and they spent the winter on the Meuse front there. Hitler fell ill with jaundice and was hospitalized in Dnipropetrovsk. There were several hospitals, and they were all overcrowded. Many soldiers suffered from severe frostbite, as there was no winter clothing in the troops at that time. After returning to his unit, Hitler found himself in positions in Uspenskaya. In the fall of 1992, he came there and met the elderly owners of the apartments where they had been staying for more than 6 months. However, Hitler did not find the German military cemetery near Uspenskaya, where 800 soldiers and officers were buried. In its place was a plowed field. We ask you to subscribe to our channel and put a like so that you will hear many more interesting stories about World War II and the opinions of all sides of the participants about certain events. During the second winter, the division was already providing warm clothing, winter jackets, the same as those of the tank soldiers, but food supplies deteriorated. There was no hunger, but there was no longer any variety in the diet. Eberhard Hitler at that time was already the commander of a sapper company. It consisted of 3 platoons, a company squad, a repair squad, an entrenchment platoon, and a supply squad. Each squad was assigned a truck. In each company, there was a messenger on a BMW motorcycle, a convoy, and a field kitchen. Each platoon had an additional truck with flamethrowers. There was also a truck with special machines for repairs and a truck for transporting gasoline and canisters. The company had rubber boats, which were used to create platforms needed for the installation of pile driving mechanisms. During the offensive in the Caucasus, sappers were again often used as ordinary infantry, as a result of which they suffered heavy losses. In 1992, Heater visited the settlement of Malgobek, the extreme point of his advance in the Caucasus. He found the place where his comrade, Lieutenant Holm, had died. In the battles near Malgobek, the SS Division Viking suffered very heavy losses. The 3rd Battalion of Germania, our left neighbor, was completely destroyed. All officers and company commanders were killed. Reconnaissance groups of Soviet soldiers regularly visited the positions of the enemy. They even managed to penetrate through the barbed wire with booby trap mines. I still don't understand how they so cleverly defused the detonators. How did they manage to find the charges at night? One day, the Russians ambushed in the forest. When the cars drove past, they threw grenades at them, after which a short firefight took place. By the time help arrived, the Russians had already fled. On March 23rd, Eberhard Heater was awarded the German Cross in Gold, Friedeck. This order was issued after the Iron Cross was awarded many times, of which he had about 5 by that time. For more than a year, he had to command cannon fodder from foreigners. In May 1943, the battered division Viking was withdrawn from the front for rest, recovery, and reorganization, first to Lozovaya, and then near Belgorod. In the summer, shortly before the Battle of Kursk, Heater was unexpectedly appointed company commander of the Estonians. There was a new commander, with whom he immediately did not have a good relationship. One day, while intoxicated, an open conflict broke out. In July 1943, the Estonian SS Volunteer Battalion Narva was incorporated into the Viking Division. It was necessary to send foreign soldiers who had a poor understanding of the German language into heavy battles without any adaptation. The Estonians were thrown into battle mercilessly. The platoon, squad, and radio operators were mostly Germans, but there were also Estonian officers. The Estonians were not as disciplined as the Germans. They were lazier and liked to drink. However, in battle they showed steadfastness and high morale. They confidently held their positions and fought against enemy infantry, even without anti-tank weapons, without fear of a large number of T-34 tanks. From afar they were attacked by 4 Panthers, one of which was lost. But at the neighbors the enemy broke through the front line. One night, a significant number of Soviet paratroopers landed in the positions of the division and neighboring units. They tried to destroy them before they could gather, organize, and go on the offensive. This was successful, although some of the Soviet paratroopers were able to retreat into the forest to the partisans, who were supplied by the Russians from the air on obsolete biplanes. They could turn off the engine at night and fly very quietly, as well as land in hard-to-reach places. After the Estonians ended, Heater again had to command foreigners. A company formed in March 1944 from Finns, Danes, and Poles. In October 1944, Heater was appointed commander of the Sapper battalion. He had to fight his way out of the Cherkassa pocket, suffering terrible losses. How we managed to get out of there, I still don't understand. I was not wounded, but I was damned exhausted. The breakout was disorganized and resembled anarchy. People came out of shattered, scattered units, maybe about 100 or 150 people. All the heavy weapons, including machine guns, were lost. Already at that moment, it was obvious that the war was lost. Subsequently, Heater participated in the defense of the city of Kovel in northern Volhynia and was again surrounded. The garrison of the city was supplied only by air, despite heavy anti-aircraft fire. Then, with great difficulty, Kovel managed to be unblocked. The Viking division could no longer fully participate in the battles. The soldiers were depressed by the defeats, but instead of going on vacation to their homeland, they again had to fight in the most difficult conditions. In terms of weapons, the division was already inferior even to homemade partisan detachments. In May 1944, the Viking Division was withdrawn from the front for reorganization into a tank division to replenish personnel, obtain new equipment and weapons. Fighting continued in Poland, including against partisan detachments. From the fall of 1944, Eberhard Heder commanded a Sapper battalion. Increasingly, sappers began to be used as ordinary infantry. The losses were very significant. Even the regimental commander died. There were constant reports of heavy fighting, losses, and a critical situation. For a long time, everyone realized that the war was lost. In the spring of 1945, everyone had only one desire: to be captured by the Anglo-Americans and not the Russians. We had to be careful not to get to Siberia. We were lucky. On May 10th, we surrendered to the Americans. We did not think then that we would be treated worse because of our SS insignia. After all, we were soldiers of the Waffen-SS, not executioners. Heder was in a prisoner of war camp, working for the Anglo-Americans, until March 1948. Then he joined the Bundeswehr. He perceived the surrender as a defeat, but also as a deliverance from the horrors of war. But Heder's first thought was, "Lord, such a path, and everything was in vain. Goodbye." We were glad to see you on our channel. Don't forget to leave comments, like, and subscribe to the channel.